In 1945, the United States thinks it has the ultimate advantage, nuclear weapons, and a head start of years on every other country. But in Moscow, the Soviet Union is already taking notes, literally, on everything America has just done, and quietly planning to break that nuclear monopoly as fast as possible. This is the story of how the Soviet Union went from 0 nuclear weapons to its first successful bomb in just 4 years, using raw science, brutal urgency, and a surprisingly effective spy network inside the Manhattan Project. We'll see how Stalin reacted to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, how Igor Kurchatov built the Soviet bomb program, and how spies like Klaus Fuchs shrank the gap between Washington and Moscow. By the end, you'll see why America's nuclear head start was much smaller than it looked, and how the Soviet bomb turned a brand new weapon into the core of the Cold War. When the Trinity test lights up the New Mexico desert in July 1945, Soviet intelligence actually knows it happened. They have agents in the United States, they track unusual scientific activity, and they see strange seismic and atmospheric data. They do not know every equation, but they know enough to realize the world has just changed. At the Potsdam Conference, President Truman casually hints to Joseph Stalin that the United States has a new, powerful weapon. Truman expects shock. Instead, Stalin barely reacts, gives a simple nod, and changes the subject. On the surface, it looks like indifference. In reality, Stalin already knows, and on the inside, he has already decided the Soviet Union must have its own bomb, no matter the cost. For Stalin, nuclear weapons are not a prestige project. They are a shield. If the United States has atomic bombs and the Soviet Union does not, Moscow is exposed to threats, pressure, and possibly even nuclear blackmail. In Stalin's worldview, that is unacceptable. Equal terror in his mind is safer than one-sided power. Even before World War II fully ends, the Soviets upgrade their small pre-war nuclear research effort into a crash program. Laboratories that once focused on basic physics now pivot hard toward uranium, plutonium, and reactors. On the scientific side, one man is put in overall charge, Igor Kurchatov, a talented physicist who suddenly finds himself responsible for the most secret and urgent project in the entire country. Kurchatov, sometimes called the father of the Soviet bomb, is not a cartoon villain. He is a serious researcher who understands both the science and the stakes. Stalin gives him a brutally simple brief: catch up to the Americans as fast as possible. In a system where failure can ruin your career or worse, that order is more than just pressure. It is a threat hanging over everyone involved. The Soviets start assembling the same basic pieces the Americans used: research centers near Moscow, uranium mines and processing plants across Soviet territory, and later a secret test site in Kazakhstan. But they also bring something unique to the table: a vast internal security apparatus that can direct resources without debate, and an intelligence service that has already penetrated the Western nuclear effort. While the Manhattan Project is running in the United States and Britain, Soviet agents quietly recruit sources inside it. One of the most important is Klaus Fuchs, a German-born communist physicist who works at Los Alamos and later in the British program. Fuchs decides, for ideological reasons, that the Soviet Union should not be left behind and passes detailed information to Soviet handlers. Fuchs and other sources do not deliver a perfect step-by-step construction manual. What they hand over is almost more powerful: confirmation that an implosion-type plutonium design is workable, rough dimensions and material properties, and insights into how the Americans solved key engineering problems. It is like being given the outline of a puzzle, with several of the hardest pieces already filled in. That means Kurchatov's team does not have to guess blindly. They still have to build reactors, understand plutonium's odd behavior, and design explosive lenses that fire with incredible precision, but they have a target to aim at. They are not wandering around in theory anymore. They know that a certain kind of bomb has already worked once in the deserts of New Mexico. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union is physically shattered by World War II. Entire cities lie in ruins, factories have been destroyed or relocated, and families are coping with staggering losses. Yet the nuclear program is protected and fed. Resources, food, and skilled labor are routed to it, even when other sectors suffer, because leaders see a working bomb as the key to never again being so vulnerable to foreign invasion. To build this new capability, the Soviet state creates closed nuclear cities in remote areas. People live, work, and raise families inside fenced zones that do not even appear on normal maps. Some of the workers and prisoners endure harsh conditions, but the scientific elite receives decent housing, supplies, and privileges because their success is directly tied to state security and Stalin's personal expectations. As the late 1940s unfold, the international climate turns colder. The Berlin blockade tests Western resolve, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization forms, and propaganda on both sides ramps up. From Moscow's perspective, all of this looks like encirclement, backed by American bombers that, in theory, can carry nuclear weapons right to Soviet cities. In Washington, many intelligence estimates still insist that the Soviet Union is years, maybe a decade, away from its first bomb. Analysts respect Soviet scientists, but they assume industrial damage, political chaos, and technical difficulty will slow them down. They underestimate what a centralized state can do when it decides that one project is more important than almost anything else. Inside the Soviet program, Kurchatov's team narrows in on a design that closely resembles the American Fat Man plutonium bomb, because they know that design has already worked. They work to build graphite-moderated reactors, chemical separation plants, and assembly lines that can reliably produce and shape plutonium cores, one cautious iteration at a time. By 1949, just 4 years after Trinity, the Soviet Union is ready for a full-scale test. The device they prepare is officially called RDS-1, with bland internal code names, but Western analysts later nickname it First Lightning. It is not elegant, it is not innovative. It is designed to be one thing above all: reliable. On August 29, 1949, at the Semipalatinsk test site in Kazakhstan, the Soviet team detonates RDS-1. There is a flash, a rising fireball, and then the familiar shape of a mushroom cloud forming over the steppe. Technicians take measurements, instruments whir, and messengers rush the data back to Moscow. The verdict is clear: the device worked. The United States learns about it indirectly. Specialized aircraft collect air samples over the Pacific and find unusual radioactive particles drifting on high-altitude winds. Analysts compare the data, run the numbers, and reach a single conclusion: another country has exploded a nuclear device, and the only realistic candidate is the Soviet Union. For Washington, this is more than a surprise. It is a psychological shock. The comfortable narrative that only America has the bomb dissolves overnight. Military planners, diplomats, and the public are forced to adjust to a world where any conflict with the Soviet Union now carries the risk of nuclear escalation. The American response is not to pause and reflect. Almost immediately, the focus shifts toward a new kind of weapon: the hydrogen bomb, or thermonuclear device, which uses fusion rather than just fission and can produce explosions many times more powerful than the one at Trinity or at Semipalatinsk. For the Soviets, RDS-1 functions as both shield and starting gun. It proves, to themselves and to the world, that the United States cannot assume permanent nuclear superiority. At the same time, it locks the Soviet Union into a long, expensive arms race in which every American advance has to be matched with a new Soviet effort. From this point on, almost every major Cold War crisis, the Korean War, confrontations in Berlin, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and others, unfolds under the shadow of two arsenals. Any miscalculation between Washington and Moscow now carries, in the background, the possibility of mushroom clouds over multiple cities. If America, in Episode 1, was the country everyone reacted to, the Soviet Union is the country that turned nuclear weapons from a one-sided advantage into a permanent standoff. With RDS-1, it ensures that any future nuclear war would not be a simple American victory, but a catastrophe for both sides. So how did the Soviet Union get the bomb? It combined high-level scientific talent, a political system willing to concentrate resources, and an intelligence network that quietly borrowed the most important ideas from its rival. In doing so, it closed the gap far faster than most outsiders thought possible. The result was not peace in any traditional sense. It was a fragile balance built on fear, a concept we now call deterrence. Neither side could launch a nuclear attack without inviting devastation in return. That logic, mutually assured destruction, became the backbone of the nuclear age for decades. In the next episode, we move to a country that was supposed to be America's closest ally, but still decided it could not rely on anyone else's bombs, the United Kingdom. How did Britain go from sharing nuclear secrets with the United States to secretly building an independent nuclear arsenal of its own?